talk about learning in case of being specific, and in your syllabus, more is better for the most part. For a long time, people kind of went with minimal syllabuses, and then frankly, students took incredible advantage of that. And so we find we need to add more and more about our expectations, about disability policies, about academic honesty in courses. So syllabuses or syllabi are growing longer. So the interactive course design model is basically learning goals, feedback and assessment, teaching and learning activities, and all of that rests on what are called situational factors. And situational factors are any and everything that impacts your course, which is a lot. The students, the time of day, it's a huge number of different things. This is a book written by somebody you know. So if you're interested in borrowing a book, if you know you're going to need to plan a syllabus soon, we do have extra copies of this. In the Teaching and Learning Center. When we talk about a paradigm shift, there has been a movement away from just pouring knowledge into the heads of the students and actively engaging students. Unfortunately, I won't be modeling that too much today because this is deliberately a short brown bag so that you'll have a lot of takeaway, but not a whole bunch of interaction. Often we put students into pegs, and our syllabus should not be so narrow that we're not giving latitude for some freedom in our classes. The students are motivated by choice, and so whenever we can build in choice in a syllabus, that's a good thing. When we talk about grading syllabi, we can look at having someone else take a look at our syllabus and critique it for us. It's often a very useful thing, particularly since I'm going to emphasize tone, and tone is how you come across in your syllabus. You're coming across as somebody who's cracking the whip, somebody who's just downright mean, or are you coming across as someone who's genuinely interested in your students' learning? This is Dee's book. Again, if any of you want to borrow the book, you can also go to the website here, and there's a 37-page guide to course design, which I strongly recommend. I've given you some pages from it in your handout, but you can actually download the whole thing. And it's very, very useful if you're going to be creating a syllabus. Hi. So we're going to look first at situational factors, and we're going to do it through a roundtable. And if you remember a roundtable, it simply means I'll ask you to take out one sheet of paper. If somebody's got like a tablet, you can be the donor. And what I'd like you to do is just brainstorm all the situational factors you want to think about when you're creating a course. So just pass the sheet of paper around, form small groups. I'll let you choose. Someone sitting near you, you need one person to contribute. And that's a good idea, to kind of move it where you can talk to one another rather than staying in a line. So once you've got a group, get one sheet of paper, one pen, pass it around, everybody add an idea. What are some things to think about when you're planning your course? Okay, let me ask for your attention again. You've got a nice long list there. I've given you a whole list in your handout packet. I'm not going to read through this, but there are a huge number of things to think about when planning your course. So if you can come back to this handout when you're actually composing your syllabus, this will be some good prompts for you to think about. What are some situational factors you had? Let me just go from group to group. Can you give us one?
The cultural and linguistic diversity of the students.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Respect for classmates, how to discuss tough issues.
Okay. This group?
Time of day and length of the class.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my goodness, evening classes.
Group behind you?
We said the layout of the class, the physical structure of the class.
Sure. Teaching style, your teaching style, good. Okay, any other groups?
The class size would be
A huge one. Class size is huge. Dee divides these up into the specific context of the teaching learning situation, and that would be the number of students you've mentioned, the level of the course, the time structure, whether it's a live or a hybrid or an online course, huge difference. The expectations of others can impact the course. Anyone here from engineering? You've got ABET expectations, and very often I've seen syllabi designed to specifically address ABET objectives. The nature of the subject is huge. You mentioned difficult discussions, so that would be controversies and so forth. And you've addressed the characteristics of the learners. If they're working, that has an impact on your course if the majority of your students are working. Their prior knowledge is huge, so you want to find out their prerequisites, what they should know. Doesn't always mean they know it, but they should know it. It's what?
Especially with mixed classes.
Oh, yeah.
Multiple levels of students.
Right. And then you mentioned teaching style. That's huge. Characteristics of the teaching, of the teacher. What are your beliefs about teaching? So in general, what you should know is your course, your students, and yourself when you're thinking about it. This is how we view our courses often. Very clear outcomes, enduring concepts, and this is often what our students see. So it's not always the same. So give them a map. That's one way of looking at the syllabus. Other people have called it a contract. Doesn't really matter what you call it as long as you've thought it through carefully. And we want to look at learning goals, and learning goals are incredibly important. If you have not laid out clear goals for your course, you don't know where you're going, and your students don't know where you're going. So that is typically where you will start. And here's the cartoon for that. Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here, said Alice. That depends a good deal on where you want to get to, said the cat. So there's lots of ways to think about student learning outcomes, but one way of doing it is thinking about what you want your students to look like, what should they be able to know and do, either at the end of the course or even in the profession. It can go beyond that. So Stephen Covey talks about to begin with the end in mind, means to start with the clear understanding of your destination. Same exact idea. And this is the cartoon about, or the photo of what your students should look like at the end of a course. So one of the things you have to think about when you're designing a course is what are the big picture concepts? What do your students absolutely have to know to take away, to understand? And that's where you want to go deep. And then you can put rings around it. Important to know and be able to do, or worth being familiar with. But you've got to be certain that your students are leaving with those big picture items. So we're going to look at some of Dee's work. He's got a handout on writing learning goals. So I'm just going to call your attention to it. We really don't have time for you to work it out here. But I've given you a lot of his worksheets. So this one, here's one on situational factors. So again, when you go to plan your course, you probably want to start with a worksheet like this. You know, what are all the things you want to take into account? And then following that is a worksheet, oops, went the wrong way. Well, following that is Dee's taxonomy. I'm going to talk just a little bit about this. If you can turn to page 4 in the handout section, I think a lot of you have it. Dee's taxonomy is unusual, and when you look at the, if you're facing it, the right-hand side, foundational knowledge, application, and integration. Those of you who know Bloom's taxonomy, that's straight Bloom. Nothing unusual, and Dee, I mean, he's not reinventing the wheel, so he's unabashed about it. I mean, why would you want to reinvent the wheel? But where Dee has added some new concepts is he's added other dimensions. The human dimension, which is caring about oneself and about others. Caring, developing feelings, interests, values. Again, a lot of us find values very important, but we find them difficult to measure. And that's okay, says Dee. That's all right. Those are our dreams, typically. And then learning how to learn is huge for students. Metacognition is what John Bransford says. And Dee's premise in his book is the more of those components, the more foundational knowledge, application, integration, human dimension, caring, and learning how to learn you can create in your course, the more significant the learning. So this is a good model to think about as you're constructing a course. So then following Dee's taxonomy, having trouble turning the page here, sorry. You've got the goal page. So again, in an ideal world, this would be a 3-hour workshop, and we would take the time for you to actually start working on your syllabus. But here is a good worksheet for you when you're ready. And so he literally takes his particular goals and talks you through it. So questions about foundational knowledge, about application goals, about integration goals, about learning how to learn goals, the human dimension. He talks you literally all the way through in the worksheets. So I really like his stuff. Dee Fink, and I showed you his book a minute ago, and we have copies in the Teaching Learning Center. Okay. The research that has stood the test of time. Any of you heard of the 7 principles of good practice in undergraduate education? They've been around since 1987, been around a long time, and you've got a URL here if you want to take a look at a whole article. But the 7 principles are gold. I mean, they really work. And so they're contact between students and faculty. And again, there's been a lot of interesting research that if you're interested in student retention, having students persist, they need to feel connected. So they need to connect with other students and they need to connect with faculty. And then cooperation is huge. Active learning we've talked about. Prompt feedback is important for learning. Time on task means you're not wasting your students' time. And that's why that syllabus should be very carefully laid out so that you've thought through your activities and the amount of time it's going to take for given units. That's why it's very hard to teach a course for the first time. I mean, even experienced teachers teaching a new course for the first time, it's hard because we just don't know how long things will take. That's why I would encourage you to look at other people's syllabi to find out how more experienced teachers have addressed the issues. Communicating high expectations is important for students because, again, the research shows if we set high expectations, most of our students will strive to reach them. We set low ones, it's lose-lose for everybody. And then you've mentioned the culturally diverse ways of knowing, so respect for diverse talents and ways of learning. So below that are some questions to ask about your syllabus. You know, is your syllabus reflecting those 7 principles? So we are ready. Well, let me see if you have any questions at this point.
Do you have any advice on constructing an online syllabus for an online class?
It's the same advice as for a face-to-face syllabus. You probably want to make your expectations even clearer in online. It was funny, we did an interview earlier today, and the person we interviewed loves online classes. I know, a lot of students don't. So you've really got to make it clear what the expectations are, the amount of time involved, how often they should be, you know, getting on a threaded discussion. So if anything, it might even be a little stricter than your face-to-face because you aren't there to exhort for all the good that does, but their principles are just the same. You know, the same components and the same clarity, same high expectations. Okay, well, let's go on to feedback and assessment. And we've talked about different types of assessment. There are 2 basic types. What are called formative and summative assessments. And there's another book called Classroom Assessment Techniques, and that's where I'm getting the cats from. But classroom assessment techniques are ways of finding out informally if your students are learning what we think we're teaching. So it's informal, ongoing. You direct those cats, but the students have opportunities to make changes, and you have opportunities to make changes when you're doing these frequently. And again, during the TA training, we modeled several of them, a focused listing just with an index card. They can be very quick. And then the formal is called summative. But the classroom assessment techniques help you learn whether your students are learning what you think you're teaching or not. Okay, then,
You're talking more about an assessment based not on tests, but just on what off the top of their heads?
Not even top of heads, just what they know. Now, we had a nice conversation in our meeting with the University Teaching Fellows Monday about classroom assessment techniques, and basically we all agreed classroom assessment technique is anything you do in class that you're monitoring. You're assessing when you're walking around listening to students working in small groups. But I've given you some here. Focused listing, for example, and other low preparation cats would be paraphrasing, directed paraphrasing, where instead of having them regurgitate a definition of a word, you ask them to put it in their own words for a given audience. And then application cards, if they can apply something, then they probably understand it. So those take about 2 minutes on an index card, and you can sort them. And again, I've shared my sorting system. It's on target, okay, and clueless. And if your clueless stack is tall, that means you got to spend some time on it. If your on target stack is tall, you've just saved a lot of time. You've saved yourself time and you've saved your students time. Yes, Madam?
For the students who are clueless.
What do you do with them?
Yeah, I mean, if it might be a relatively low stack, but I mean, how do you approach that as well? 'Cause
You teach it, or you have the students teach each other. I just came from a classroom observation, and this was a tough class. It's international finance. And what I was most impressed with is they were working problems together, and there was a ton of peer coaching going on. It was very clear in the group I was sitting next to, there were some who were clueless, and then there were others who were really getting it, but they were kind enough, you know, to coach, to help the ones that needed help. So I really think group work is an easy answer, because you can't possibly tutor them one-on-one. Any other questions? Okay, some other classroom assessment techniques. Let me give you the cartoons here first. I taught Stripe how to whistle. I don't hear him whistling. I said I taught him. I didn't say he learned it. That's what classroom assessment techniques will help you with. Similarly, the informal assessments are not competition, and it doesn't take all the fun out of it, trust me. It's very helpful for you and for the students to do them. So other things you can do, punctuated lectures, and that's where you just pose questions as you're lecturing to help students think about their thinking. Do you have a question or comment? So what were you doing to make connections between this new information and what you already know? Students are going to go, huh? They don't know they're supposed to be doing that. No, these are real questions. What did you expect to come next in the lecture, and why? It's actually, you know, processing the lecture instead of just passively writing it down, which I tended to do a lot. I was a little automaton, you know, I'd end up like that at the end of a class, but I got it all. But then it meant I had to go back because I wasn't thinking at the time. I was just automatically writing it down, which is why some people have gone to the Zen of PowerPoint, because they don't have to write. It's all here. You can add ideas and notes and so forth, but you don't have to spend a lot of your time. So think, pair, share, good example of a cat, and very simple and easy to do. How many of you have actually used to think, pair, share in classes? Good. That's great. That's over half.
Can you review the think, pair, share again?
Basically, you pose a question, and you give students time to either think, like 30 seconds, or to write. I actually prefer writing because I think they go into more depth, and then I have some evidence of what they actually thought about. But then at that point, they turn to someone else and discuss what they've written or what they've thought about. And then you can do a whole class share, and the quality goes way up because they've had time for rehearsal, they've had time for reinforcement, they've had time for reflection. Because if you just toss questions out, your extroverts are the ones that answer, often before they've even put the brains in gear. And your introverts are still, you know, starting to think about it. And so that gives an opportunity for a lot more in-depth thinking about given topics. So there's lots of cats, and I've just gone through a bunch of them, so let's catch up here. Focused listing we talked about. We talked about some other low preparation cats. This is one I've shared before, but I really, really like it. So some of you may not have seen it. This is simply a way to find out what your students come into class with and what they leave with. So basically, I observed this being done at in a law class at the Air Force Academy. And Comedy Cottage was the name of the case study the students were supposed to have read. So John Hurdle just asked them, what's the key point of the case study? And so they wrote it down, And you notice the second student, no idea what this case is about, don't remember. Clueless, okay? But at the end of class, you draw a line and you do the same thing. What's the point of the case study? That's after the discussion has transpired. And the first student modified his or her ideas. The second student left with a good idea of what it's about. So I use it in my lit classes now. You know, what's the theme of a lesson before dying when they come in? And then what's the theme when they go out? Let's see, we talked about punctuated lectures and another cartoon. Does he know any other tricks? Sure, we taught him all of them, but this is the only one he learned. But you're finding out. And then again, we talked about Think, Pair, Share, and there's the Think, Pair, Share cartoon. And so let's move now to what's called summative assessment. And D. Fink has a kind of fancy name for it. He calls it educative assessment. So you don't have to use the fancy term, but basically we'll look at four parts out of D's model. The idea of forward-looking assessment, self-assessment, criterion standards, and what he calls fidelity feedback. So we'll look first at the standards. And you can't read this, but I don't expect you to. But standards mean there's a rubric. And rubrics are gold. They take some time for us to develop, and they're always a work in progress. But once you have a rubric, you just circle. You don't have to do a lot of writing. It gives the students some very positive feedback, but you don't have to write a heck of a lot. You can still add comments, but basically most of it's already there. Again, a lot of upfront time, and there's lots of web pages out there that can help you develop rubrics. So I'd encourage you to use them, to develop them. And forward-looking assessment refers to the idea of what students should be able to do in the future. Too often when we design tests, they're regurgitation tests. You know, name three trees in the tropical rainforest, okay? You know, memory. Well, forward-looking assessment would say, what can we do to save the rainforests? You know, it focuses on the doing, on the practical, on real-world applications. And so it's a much more valid way of assessing students. And they like it better because it's more thought-provoking. It's not just simple recall or regurgitation. Gives them authentic examples. So I've given you some examples in your handout. And we'll take a look at this. Backward-looking assessment would be, I left out the word die, but, or when did Ulysses S. Grant die? You knew this one, didn't you? Somebody knew it last time. I think I've forgotten. I think it was 1892, but I'm not sure. Which instrument is most unlike the others? Again, not much thought involved in that. Some forward-looking assessment examples. Review the patient information included in the following case study and discuss the likely diagnosis and subsequent treatment plan. Very applied, very authentic if people are going into healthcare. Analyze the behaviors that led up to the shootings in Tucson and suggest possible legal and humane courses of action that might have prevented the tragedy. Again, very applied, very realistic. So you want to also give examples of self-assessment. That's again another piece of Dee's work. And we've talked in the past about John Bransford's work. Bransford, you can download his whole book, How People Learn. And he basically talks about deep foundational knowledge, prior learning, and metacognition. Metacognition is self-assessment, getting your students to figure out if they actually know, if they actually are learning. And a lot of them can't self-assess. and I've mentioned my daughter happens to be one of those. It's created all kinds of problems for her in high school. You know, I studied the math test, Mom, I'm going to do great. And then she wouldn't. So anyway, we can build in ways to get our students to reflect on do they know this or not, and how do they know it, and how well do they know it before the exam. You're going to help them out a lot. Oh, I forgot the cartoon here. Biology test, use aorta in a sentence. Aorta studied more for this test. That's self-assessment. Okay, and then finally D calls fidelity feedback. This gets a little bit hokey, but it's frequent, immediate, discriminating, meaning it's based on criteria and standards, and then the hokey part comes with a loving or supportive approach used. I used to tell my students, you know, I'm marking all over your compositions because I love you and I want you to learn, and they didn't buy into that at all. But I tried. Okay, so the call your attention to another worksheet here. Again, these just, he had to fight Josie Bass to put these worksheets out. They didn't want him to publish them for free. And I am so glad he won that battle. So here's a worksheet, step 3 worksheet, procedures for educative assessment. Again, when you get ready to work on your syllabus, just come back to these worksheets and kind of plan your way through it. So there's the 4 pieces: the forward-looking assessment, criteria and standards, self-assessment, and fidelity feedback. And we'll move into the teaching and learning activities, and there are tons of them. We've looked at active learning for much of our time together. And so I'm not going to lecture to you on active learning. Oh, thank you, Dr. Millis. But I think you're aware of a lot of things you can do. I'm doing a little paper for the Idea Center. They have short papers and on active learning, and I was trying to think, well, what example am I going to use? And so I decided on Send a Problem. And Send a Problem, I don't think I've modeled with any of you, but I really like it. You need 3 problems and 3 file folders, and you just put the problem on the file folder. The problems can be case studies, they can be questions, like I've done it with Hamlet. Why does Hamlet treat Ophelia as he does in Act 2? And then each group of 4 has one of the 3 problems, and so they write solutions and then put the solutions in the folder. Then the folder gets passed to the second group. They don't open it, because that shuts down thinking. They just read the yellow sticky that outlines the problem, do the same thing. They write the answers to the case study, the problem. My friend Phil does it with accounting problems. It gets passed a 3rd time. This time they do open it up. They read what the other 2 teams have done, and then they write a 3rd response that synthesizes all 3 of them. It takes about at least 30 minutes, so it's an investment, but you're getting into higher order thinking because they're doing analysis and synthesis at the very end. There's a little chart from Dee's book that talks about multiple activities that promote active learning. And so he's mentioning things like case studies, games, role plays, stories, including films, course website, internet. You were mentioning online courses. And basically, he looks at doing, observing, thinking about what you're doing as a definition for active learning. And the thinking about what you're doing is important, because doing in itself is not enough. So questions to date? Anything on this point, we're going to move into the syllabus now. You've already planned your course, or at least you have the worksheets when you're ready to plan your course. Okay, the course, course outline. I don't know why that's backwards. That's very interesting. Again, I've given you some text here. When you're ready to write your syllabus, just go back to the text and look at the course outline. I think one of the biggest things you need to do is don't overlook the holidays. It'll kill you, you know, if you overlook holidays. And also, I would be aware when football season starts here in the fall. Be aware of other situational factors that could have an impact on your class. And then sense of intellectual momentum. There's lots of beautiful things you can do in a course outline. What I would suggest is that you talk to someone about your syllabus, have them review it. It's very hard for us to be objective about our own writing, even a syllabus. So having someone else read it, how do you feel about this? Would you want to take this course? Is it clear? Do you understand the expectations? Do you understand the grading system? I've seen grading systems that were so convoluted that there wasn't a way in holy heck I was going to understand it, let alone the students. So you can get feedback on that. And then the possible components of the syllabus, again, just a huge list here, so I'll just highlight some, and maybe you have some favorites. I think it's a great idea to include letters from other students who've taken the course in the past, and to include your statement of teaching philosophy. And if you go to the TLC webpage, there's some prompts for how to write a teaching philosophy statement. So if you haven't written one, they're becoming more and more an expectation for jobs. So think seriously about it. I'm sorry?
Where did you say that form was?
It's a series of articles and examples. They're on the Teaching Learning Center website. So you just go to the usual UC and then just do /TLC, and you'll get there. So we've talked about the course goals, objectives, purposes, obviously readings, the calendar. The course policies are huge. Unfortunately, we need to do them not just to promote us, but to protect us. And be careful, though, of the nagging syllabus, you know, because you can get pretty tough in your policies, and that's where having another person read it would probably help you. Your teaching approaches, I use a lot of group work, so I have an explanation in my syllabus about why I'm doing group work, why it's valuable, how it's going to work. Issues with civility. It was interesting, I just chatted with Jose on my way over here. He's observing a class where civility is an issue. So we're going to see if we can find some articles or something that addresses that issue. So you want your students to recognize that you have expectations of them, but they have expectations for you as well. And one of them is civility on both sides, you know, not just the student side. And integrating the course, I've mentioned, is very, very important. And that means everything's in alignment. And so your goals and expectations fit with your assessment. And we've looked at the possible components. The last thing I would encourage you to look at is tone. If your students are seeing you like this, that's probably not a good thing. So again, if you can get somebody else to read it and let you know how you're coming across, that's very helpful. Okay, ready for the cartoon finale. I actually got through early. Sorry about that. Y'all still give you an hour credit. I just talked fast. But any questions or comments to date? Okay, well, cartoon finale. Change. Your syllabus should always be changing. And it should be changing creatively and thoughtfully and reflectively. You can get stuck writing a syllabus like you can get stuck writing anything else. So just hop to a new section. You know, don't just stay on a section that's slowing you down. And so you and your students and your syllabi will go galloping into the sunset. So that is the official end.